The area, of course, there is, of course, the battleground is down here, the bottom of that arrow. It's moved a wee bit, I think, here. And Battle of Gilboa at the bottom of the screen. You might not, that doesn't come up maybe on it, and Endor is up here. And so it was a bit of a distance for him to go to get to her, but it was important. He thought it was important to do so. Right, so. Why consultation suspended? So we're trying to make sense of this if we can learn something from it. Right. Israel is in a bad situation. Really terrible situation, you know. King Saul had disobeyed God. 1 Samuel 28:18, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord, nor execute his fierce wrath upon Amalek, therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day. And you might wonder, I could discuss it after, why he had to do that, why Amalek was such a bad man to have to do that. How do we understand this then? The church cannot defend itself, of course. That's important, you know, there. Israel as a nation had to protect itself. Nations are different than church. And we as a church cannot, you know, the weapons we fight with are spiritual, not carnal. The apostles, of course, we know they never took up arms to go against those who are the Roman government. Or the Roman, you know, rule. So many nations, of course, opposed to God. And that was the situation then around that area, the neighbors of Israel. They were all opposed to a nation that was wanting to follow the Lord. Israel didn't really follow it very good. In some cases, they tried to adapt some of the things, and that wasn't good for them either, you know. Obedience, of course, was important. In 1 Samuel 15:1, Samuel also said to Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore heed the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel, how he ambushed him on the way when he came up from Egypt. And that, of course, was held against the Amalekites for what they did, and also some other things as well, terrible things, you know. In chapter 28:18, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord, nor execute his fierce wrath upon Amalek, therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day. That might seem hard, that might seem very cruel, very tough, you see, but of course, Saul was told, or Samuel told Saul, you know, to obey is better than sacrifice. So disobedience was costly, very costly, you know. And we can discuss Amalek and his life, you know. He was he had been doing terrible things, and, you know, it seemed to be very hard. We think of Jonah. Jonah, he was angry, you know, against God, and he was angry, you know, for he thought the Ninevites should be destroyed. That's what he was preaching, you see. But the Ninevites repented, and God didn't want to, you know, thought about all the people he had there, and there was a mighty turnaround in that generation. Of course, it only lasted for 100 years, but that's the way it goes. And Saul. And so poor Saul was another case of someone who he had disobeyed the Lord, and that is costly. It's costly for us as Christians as well too, you see. We have to follow the Lord. We might think of David and the things he did, but he didn't do things, I suppose, then, like Saul. But he, you know, we'll not really discuss him now, because we do know there was a turning in Saul's life, in David's life. And we'll see that maybe before we leave this. What has Amalek done? What did he do to people to the sick? Why was it that that God was so angry? Well, we mentioned one already. In verse 15:33, but Samuel said, as your sword has made women childless, so your mother be childless among women. And Samuel hacked Agag in pieces before the Lord in Gilgal. And so it was these atrocities, you see, and the terrible things he had caused in people. And some of them would be maybe done against pagan nations too. He wasn't really mine, but he particularly it was against Israel. Our spiritual battles. In 2 Corinthians 10:4 and 5, we're reminded here as Christians, for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for the pulling down of strongholds, casting down arguments and everything, high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. And so it's a good line, it's a good instruction there. It's important for us in using the spiritual weapons, the weapons that God has given us, and the weapons of prayer and all that, you see, that we have. Right. So it's quite challenging, isn't it? Warning then, in Leviticus 19:31, give no regard to mediums and familiar spirits. Do not seek after them to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. Why am I putting that? It's because of Saul here going to look for an answer, because God wasn't answering him, you know, and he had to try another way. According to experts, the medium by satanic influence is in control of the seance. And of course, normally it is a fake conversation. What they do is they try to take on the voice of the person, and Satan does work through them and tries to bring up the person from the dead, but it's only, you know, their voice. They just try to speak and all that sort of thing, and it's all changed, you know. It's never really real, it's faked, you know, and not the real person, and they never can do that. It's a seance, you know. Right. As far as I know, Sean's not, or Sam's not here. He's a French speaker. So, in this case, the medium lost control. How do I say that? Well, why? Well, she lost control because Samuel came up. Right. And Samuel did come up, verse 12 there. Read that there, you see. And when the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice, and the woman spoke to Saul, saying, why have you deceived me? For you are Saul. And there it was, you see. She realized she had been deceived. She realized here it was, you see, she was caught in the act, and she thought this was. So really, she in no way was able to bring up a person, you know. That wasn't in her power to do so. So the explanation. Spirit ascending out of the earth, verse 13. And the king said to her, do not be afraid, what did you see? And the woman said to Saul, I have saw a spirit ascending out of the earth. Right. That's what she saw, a spirit ascending out of the earth. Right. Right. So in 1 Samuel 28:14, so he said to her, what is his form? And she said, an old man is coming up, and he is covered with a mantle. And Saul perceived that it was Samuel, and he stooped with his face to the ground and bowed down, you know. So at least he had some reverence, you see, but it was the wrong way. He couldn't get answers through, as we were reading from God. from anything. He tried all kinds of things, and this was his final way of trying to get a word. The conversation. Samuel was disturbed out of death, brought up from death. That is amazing, eh? Saul was distressed about the war, wasn't he? He was very distressed. The war, of course, was against him. The Philistines had a far bigger army, and he just felt defeated here. This was going to be the end. God had departed from him was the great thing. So he had no power. He had no power over this. No power to left in him, and he had no help from God. That was the hard thing, you see, for poor Saul. But he had disobeyed the Lord and couldn't expect. So there was total silence there. God wasn't speaking, and that was quite sad, wasn't it? Right. It was pointless, of course, It was no use for him. He was in a bad way. And that doesn't do, does it? Quite a warning, God is Saul's enemy. That's hard, isn't it? He has totally gone that far. So in Psalm 120, verse 2, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side, when men rose up against us, then they would have swallowed us alive when their wrath was kindled against us. And so there it is. That's encouragement for us, that the Lord to be on our side and to be trusting in him. Our hope is in the Lord through all the trials and COVID, different things that we face and come through, that we can have the Lord on our side. That is the great thing. That is what is most necessary, isn't it? So the final words. Saul disobeyed God's command. That was hard, wasn't it? He disobeyed God's command. That's his whole mistake. All right? And Saul is punished. Verse 19. Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with you into the hand of the Philistines. And tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. The Lord will also deliver the army of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. So be with them in death, They wouldn't be literally in the same place as Saul, because Saul was a believer. Samuel was a believer, and Saul was not. And so Saul collapsed. He couldn't take any more in there, He collapsed there, and he fell on his face, and he had no more strength left in him there, it says, He hadn't eaten any food, and he had gone through an awful situation. But, of course, the lady was very kind to him, wasn't she? She was a very kind lady, and she decided to offer to be good and to provide food. Coaxed him to eat, because it was he was so hungry, and he was so weak, and all that, and the effect of the whole thing upon him. This would have even caused it.